On the first of every month, I sent $2,000. No reminders. No delays. 83 months in a row. This month, I didn't. I sat there looking at my account, knowing exactly what day it was, and just left it. 3 days later, my mother called. "No, are you okay? No, did something happen?" Her voice was already set. "Why would you abandon us like this?" I didn't answer right away. Just held the phone there, listening to that word. Abandon. I sent them $2,000 every month for 7 years. The first month I stopped. That's what it became. It didn't start as a system. It started as a call. My mother, late evening, voice tight in a way I hadn't heard before. Not dramatic, just strained. Things had gone sideways for them. A mix of decisions that didn't land well. Some bad timing. A few things that stacked instead of resolving. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that the margin disappeared. They weren't asking for a long-term solution. Just help getting through it. Just for a while, she said, until things stabilize. That made sense to me. I had just started doing well at the time. Income steady, no major obligations yet. So I said yes. Not after thinking it through in detail. Just yes. I set up the transfer that week. $2,000 on the first of every month. Automatic. Clean. No follow-up needed. The first month, she called to thank me. Not overly emotional. Just direct. "That helps more than you think," she said. "Of course," I replied. That was the tone. Practical. Contained. The second month, there was no call. Just a message. "Got it, thank you." By the third, nothing. No acknowledgement. No check-in. That didn't bother me. It felt like things were stabilizing. Which was the point. I didn't need thanks. Didn't expect it. I thought the lack of reaction meant it was working. That was the assumption. And once that assumption settled, the transfer became routine. The first of every month. Same amount. Same timing. I'd see the confirmation, glance at it, then move on. No discussion around it. No updates about how things were improving. Just continuation. That should have triggered a conversation at some point. A check-in. A timeline. Something that defined what this was. It didn't. Not from them. And not from me. I didn't ask how long they needed it. Didn't ask what the plan was on their side. I just kept sending it. Because stopping felt harder than continuing. And continuing didn't require any conversation. That was the part one didn't question. Months turned into a year. Then another. The transfer stayed exactly the same. No adjustment. No pause. No renegotiation. Just constant. At some point, it stopped feeling like help. Not in a negative way. Just expected. Like something that existed outside of decision. The money left my account on the first. Arrived in theirs. No friction. No awareness beyond the moment it happened. I remember once, maybe in the third year, I mentioned it casually during a visit. "Are things getting better on your side?" I asked. My father nodded. "Yeah, we're managing." That was it. No detail. No sense of direction. Just managing. I didn't push. It felt unnecessary. If they said they were managing, then things were under control. That was the logic. Simple and easy to live with. I adjusted my own life around it without thinking too much about it. Skipped certain things. Delayed others. Nothing extreme. Just small decisions that added up over time. Trips I didn't take. Investments I postponed. Margins I kept tighter than I needed to. It didn't feel like sacrifice. Because I never framed it that way. I framed it as responsibility. Something that had become part of how things worked. That was the shift. It wasn't help anymore. It was infrastructure. Quiet. Reliable. Unquestioned. I thought consistency meant stability. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means something has been absorbed so completely it's no longer seen. By the fifth year, it wasn't something we talked about at all. Not even indirectly. No updates. No references. No acknowledgement of what it represented. Just assumed. I didn't challenge that. Because challenging it would have required redefining it. And redefining it might have meant changing it. I wasn't ready to do that. So I let it stay where it was. Unspoken. Untouched. By the seventh year, it had been there so long it felt permanent. Not because anyone said it was. Because no one had ever said it wasn't. That was the mistake. I never named it. Never set a boundary around it. Never defined its purpose or its end. I just kept doing it, month after month, until it stopped being something I chose and became something everyone assumed would always be there. It shifted in the 7th year. Not suddenly. Not in a way that forced a decision right away. Just pressure. My own situation changed. A business deal that didn't land the way it was supposed to. Cash flow tightening in ways I hadn't planned for. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that things I'd been carrying without thinking started to matter. The transfer was one of them. $2,000, first of every month. It had always just happened. Now it didn't feel automatic anymore. It felt like something I needed to look at. I sat down one evening, went through everything. Accounts, projections, what the next few months would look like. The numbers were clear. I could keep doing it, but only by tightening everything else further. Or I could pause it, temporarily, give myself space to stabilize things on my side. That was the first time in 7 years I had even considered that as an option. That should have happened earlier. It didn't. I called them a month in advance. Didn't wait until the last minute. Didn't let it just stop without warning. I need to pause the transfer for a bit, I said. Kept it simple. Explained what had changed on my side. Not dramatic, just factual. There was a pause on the line. Long enough to feel. That's not great timing, my mother said. Her tone wasn't panicked, just strained in a different way. I know, I said. It's not ideal. I thought that would open a conversation. About how long. About what they needed. About how we could adjust. It didn't. So what were we supposed to do? She asked. That was the first moment something felt off. Not because of the question. Because of how it was framed. Not as a shared problem. As a gap I was creating. It's temporary, I said. I just need a few months to get things steady again. Another pause. Then my father spoke. We've been relying on that, he said. Calm. Direct. I nodded, even though they couldn't see it. I know, I replied. That's why I'm telling you ahead of time. That should have mattered. It didn't land that way. The conversation stayed short after that. No plan. No discussion about adjustments on their side. Just discomfort. I hung up and sat there for a minute. Something in the tone didn't match what I expected. Not anger, just expectation. Like I had shifted something that wasn't supposed to move. I thought it would settle, that they'd adjust once they had time to process it. Instead, I found myself hesitating the next month. The first came around. I looked at the account, knew what I had said, and still made the transfer. Not because I changed my mind, because it felt easier than holding the line. That should have told me something. It did. I just didn't act on it. The second month, I did the same thing. Another $2,000. No acknowledgement. No mention of the conversation we had. Like it hadn't happened. That was the part that stayed with me. Not that they needed it. That made sense. It was that the pause I had clearly stated wasn't treated as real. It had been absorbed the same way everything else had. Adjusted around. Ignored until it disappeared. By the third month, I couldn't keep doing that. Not without creating a bigger problem for myself. So I stopped. No second call. No new explanation. I had already said what needed to be said. The first came and went. No transfer. I noticed it. Sat with it for a second. Then moved on. The second day passed. Nothing. The third day, my phone rang. My mother. I answered. Hello. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't mention the timing. Didn't reference the conversation we had a month before. Her voice was already set. Why would you abandon us like this? I didn't speak right away. Just held the phone, listening to the word. Abandon. 7 years. 83 months. $2,000 every single time. The first month, I didn't send it. That's what it became. I thought giving them notice would make this easier. It didn't. It just made it clearer. What I had been calling support. They had already started calling something else. I didn't respond to her right away. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because the word didn't match anything I thought we had been doing. Abandon. I leaned back slightly in the chair, phone still at my ear. I told you this was coming, I said. My voice stayed even. Not defensive, just steady. That's not the point, she replied. Quick, like the explanation didn't change anything. We needed that, she added. Needed, not appreciated, not helped by. Needed. I thought that would make me angry. It didn't. It clarified something. I had been thinking of it as support, something I chose to give, something that could be adjusted when my situation changed. They weren't seeing it that way. They were seeing it as part of how things worked, like it had always been there, and always would be. I gave you a month's notice, I said. You gave us a warning, she replied. That's not the same as solving the problem. That landed, not because it was wrong, because it showed where we were standing. She wasn't hearing a boundary. She was hearing a disruption. I thought the consistency I had given them would matter in this moment, that it would create some context. It didn't. It had done the opposite. It had erased itself. I shifted slightly in my seat, pressing my fingers lightly against the edge of the table. How are things on your side? I asked, not as a challenge, just trying to understand what had changed. They're the same, she said. That's the issue. I nodded once. Again, even though she couldn't see it. Of course they were the same, because nothing in the last 7 years had required them to be different. I had filled the gap every single month, without interruption, without condition. That was the pattern, and patterns don't announce themselves as temporary. They just become normal. I can't keep doing it right now, I said. That's where I'm at. Silence on the line. Not empty, just held. Then she said it again. You're putting us in a very difficult position. That was closer to what I expected, but it still sat wrong, because it didn't include anything about what had been done before, only what was happening now. I thought about the years behind this moment. 7 years, 83 transfers. I didn't need to calculate it. The number was already there. Trips I didn't take. Investments I delayed. Margins I kept tighter than they needed to be. Not out of resentment, just adjustment. I had shaped my life around that commitment without ever naming it as one. And now, the moment it paused, none of that context came with it. It didn't follow the absence. It just disappeared. That was the part that stayed with me. Not that they needed help. That made sense. It was that the help had become invisible. So invisible that the first interruption didn't register as a change. It registered as a failure. I'm not abandoning you, I said. Not defensive, just clear. It feels like it, she replied. That was the closest we got to the same sentence. I thought this would turn into something louder. An argument, a push from both sides. It didn't. It stayed contained, which made it sharper. There was nowhere for it to hide. No raised voices to blur it. Just two different understandings sitting in the same space. We ended the call a few minutes later. No resolution, no agreement, just distance. I set the phone down on the table and didn't move for a second. Not thinking, not replaying, just placing it. I thought I'd feel guilty. I didn't. I felt aware of what the last 7 years had actually built. Not support, not a temporary solution. Something that had been absorbed into their sense of stability so completely that it no longer belonged to me. That was the shift. Not in them. In me. I stopped seeing the transfer as something I was giving, and started seeing it as something that had been taken into the structure of their lives, without ever being defined. I thought stopping it would create a problem. It did, but not the one I expected. It didn't just expose a financial gap. It exposed what the money had come to mean. And once that meaning was clear, there wasn't any version of me that could go back to sending it the same way again. After that call, I didn't restart the transfer. That was the first clear decision I made. Not reactive, not emotional, just deliberate. I could have sent it the next day, smoothed it over, reset things back to how they had been. That would have been the easier move. It always had been. But something about the word she used stayed. Abandon. I didn't need to argue with it. I needed to understand what it meant in the context we had built. And I couldn't do that if I just went back to sending the money. So I left it paused. The first of the next month came again. No transfer. I noticed the date, the same way I always had. Only this time, it held weight. I didn't open my banking app, didn't hover over it, just let the day pass. That was new, not because I was resisting something, because I wasn't avoiding anything either. I had already said what needed to be said. Now I needed something else. Clarity. I thought about calling them again, try to explain it better, reframe what I meant. I didn't. Explanation wasn't the issue. They had heard me. They just didn't see it the same way. And explaining more wouldn't change that. What needed to change wasn't the wording. It was the understanding underneath it. That couldn't happen over the phone. I needed to sit with them, in the same room. No distance to soften it. No way to end the conversation early. That was the shift. Not in the money, in how I approached it. For 7 years, I had handled it quietly. No discussion, no structure, no boundaries around it. Just consistency. Now it needed definition, and definition requires a conversation. I thought that would feel confrontational. It didn't. It felt overdue. I booked a flight the next day. Didn't overthink it. Didn't wait for a better time. If anything, waiting had been the problem. Pushing things forward without ever stopping to look at them directly. This time I was going to stop. Before I left, I went through my accounts again. Not to convince myself of anything, just to see it clearly. The transfers, month after month. Same amount, same timing. 7 years, $2,000 every time. I didn't calculate the total at first. Didn't need to. I already knew what it would be. But I did it anyway. $168,000. I stared at the number for a second. Not in shock. Not in regret. Just recognition. That was the scale of what had been given. And none of it had ever been named. That was the part that mattered. Not the number itself. The fact that it had never been placed in a conversation. Never framed as something chosen. Something temporary. Something that could be adjusted. It had just existed. And because it existed without definition, it became something else entirely. I thought about how to say it. Not in detail. Just the shape of the conversation. I wasn't going there to argue. Wasn't going to list sacrifices or create pressure around what I had done. That wouldn't land. It would just turn into defense. What I needed was simpler. I needed them to see what the transfer actually was. Not infrastructure. Not something automatic. A choice. A consistent one, yes. But still a choice. And choices can change. That was the part they hadn't acknowledged. Or maybe hadn't needed to. Until now. I packed light. Just enough for a few days. This wasn't a long visit. It didn't need to be. The conversation itself was the point. Everything else could happen around it. The night before I left, I sat at the table for a while. No phone. No distractions. Just thinking through it one more time. Not what I would say. What I wouldn't do. I wouldn't soften it to make it easier for them to accept. I wouldn't frame it as temporary if I didn't know that was true. And I wouldn't let the word abandonment go unexamined. That was the center of it, not the money. That word, because it revealed how everything had been seen. 7 years of support. And the first pause became abandonment. That wasn't about 1 month. That was about what the 7 years had turned into. I thought this would feel heavier, more confrontational. It didn't. It felt clear, like something I had been avoiding naming had finally been placed where it belonged. The next morning, I left early. Airport, flight, the usual rhythm. Nothing about the process felt different, which made sense. The change wasn't in the logistics. It was in what I was walking into. For the first time since I started sending that money, I wasn't going to continue the pattern. I was going to define it. And once that decision was made, there wasn't any version of me that walked into that house and pretended this was still something automatic. We sat at the table the same way we always did. Same chairs, same distance between us. Nothing about the setting suggested this was different. That made it easier to start. I didn't wait. I want to talk about the transfers, I said. No build-up, no soft entry, just placed. My mother shifted slightly in her chair. My father stayed still, hands resting on the table. We already talked about that, she said. Her tone wasn't sharp, just resistant. Not really. I replied. I kept my voice even. We talked about me stopping. A small pause. I want to talk about what it's been. That changed the direction. Not dramatically, but enough. I leaned back slightly, then forward again, settling into the position. I've been sending $2,000 every month for 7 years, I said. No emphasis, just factual. Neither of them interrupted. That's 84 months, I added. One transfer every single time. My mother opened her mouth to speak. I raised my hand slightly. Let me finish, I said. Not sharp, just clear. She stopped. I continued. That's $168,000, I said. The number sat there. I didn't push it further. Didn't explain it. It didn't need explanation. It just needed to exist in the room. I thought that would create a reaction. Shock. Defensiveness. Something. It didn't. It created stillness. My father looked down at the table for a second. My mother shifted again, this time leaning back slightly. I'm not saying that to make you feel anything, I said. I'm saying it because we've never actually said it out loud. That mattered. Not as pressure, as context. I rested my hands flat on the table. You called it abandonment, I said. I looked directly at her. That's the part one want to talk about. She held my gaze. That's what it felt like, she replied. Her voice was steady, not louder, not defensive, just firm. I nodded once. I understand that's how it felt, I said. But I want to understand how 7 years of consistent support turns into abandonment the first time it pauses. Silence. Not empty. Just held. My father shifted slightly in his seat, then went still again. My mother inhaled, then spoke. We relied on it, she said. You knew that. I did, I replied. And I told you a month before that I needed to stop for a while. That doesn't change what it does to us, she said. That was the closest we had been to the same sentence. I nodded again. I'm not saying it doesn't create a problem, I said. I'm saying it doesn't equal abandonment. She didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stay. Didn't fill it. Didn't move around it. That was new. Before, I would have softened it, reframed it, moved us towards something easier. I didn't do that now. I made a choice every month for 7 years, I said, to send that money. I kept my tone steady. No one asked me to formalize it. No one asked me how long I could do it. And I didn't bring that up either. That part mattered, because it wasn't just about them. It was about what I hadn't done. I let it become something that felt permanent, I said, but I never said it was. My father finally spoke. Quiet. You never said it wasn't either. I looked at him. That's true, I said. That was the line that held both sides. No argument around it. Just fact. That's why we're here now, I added. My mother leaned forward slightly. So what are you saying? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know. Because I wanted to land cleanly. I'm saying we need to redefine this, I said. Not louder. Not softer. Just clear. It can't be something that's assumed anymore. She exhaled slow. And what does that mean for us right now? She asked. It means it's paused, I said. And it stays paused until we understand what it actually is. Silence again. Longer this time. My father looked up then at me. He didn't say anything, but something in his posture had shifted. Less fixed, more aware. My mother stayed where she was, holding it. I thought this would turn into something heavier, more emotional, more difficult to contain. It didn't. It stayed exactly where it needed to be. Clear, uncomfortable, but defined. That word matters, I said. Abandonment. I held her gaze. Because if that's what this becomes the moment it stops, then we need to understand what it was the whole time. She didn't answer. Not right away. But she didn't look away either. And for the first time in the conversation, it felt like we were looking at the same thing. Not agreeing, but seeing it. That was the shift. Not in the money, in the meaning. And once that was on the table, there wasn't any version of this that went back to being invisible again. The conversation didn't end cleanly. There was no moment where everything clicked into place. No agreement that tied it up in a way that felt resolved. It just settled. We stayed at the table longer than usual. Not talking the entire time, but not leaving either. That was new. Before, we would have moved on, shifted into something easier. Let the discomfort dissolve without being named. This time it stayed, and that mattered. Over the next couple of days, things were quieter. Not tense, just more deliberate. My mother spoke less than usual. My father even less. But when they did, it wasn't framed the same way. No mention of abandonment. No repetition of that word. That was enough to tell me something had shifted. Not everything, but something. On the second day, my father brought it up again. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us. He leaned against the counter, looking at nothing in particular. We didn't think about it like that, he said. I didn't answer right away. Not because I disagreed, because I understood what he meant. You didn't have to, I said. It just became that way. He nodded once. That's on us too, he added. That was the first time either of them had placed any part of it on their side. Not as an apology. Not fully. Just acknowledgement. That mattered more than anything else he could have said. My mother didn't approach it the same way. She was quieter, but when she spoke, there was still resistance. Not in the facts, in what it meant for her. You can't just stop something people depend on, she said at one point. Her tone wasn't accusatory this time, just strained. I didn't just stop it, I replied. I told you ahead of time. She nodded, but didn't fully concede it. That made sense. This wasn't just about money for her. It was about stability, predictability, something she had built her sense of security around. And I had been part of that, whether I named it or not. That was the part one had to hold too, not as guilt, as context. By the time I left, nothing was fully resolved, but it wasn't undefined anymore. And that was enough. A few weeks later, we spoke again. This time it was different, less defensive, less reactive, more practical. What can you do right now? My father asked. Not what should you do? Not why did you stop? Just what's possible. That was the shift. I thought about it for a second, then answered. Not the same amount, I said, and not without a timeline. He nodded. My mother didn't interrupt. That was new. We talked through it. Not in detail at first, just the shape of it. A reduced amount, clear duration, a reason for it that had an end. Not open-ended, not assumed, defined. That was the difference. The transfers resumed a month later. Smaller, structured, named. It didn't feel the same. Not because it was less, because it was understood. And that changed everything. It was no longer something invisible. No longer something that sat in the background without acknowledgement. It was a choice again, a deliberate one. That mattered more than the amount ever did. A few days after that, I called my brother. That conversation was harder. Not because he disagreed, because he hadn't been part of any of it. I've been sending the money every month for 7 years, I said. There was a pause. Okay, he replied. I told him the amount, the duration, the structure we had just put in place. Another pause. Longer this time. I didn't know it was that much, he said. I didn't tell you, I replied. That was on me. The same pattern. Quiet. Unspoken. Unexamined. That can't just be mine, I added. Not as a demand. Just fact. He didn't argue it. That surprised me. All right, he said. Let me look at what I can do. That was enough for now. Not a solution. Not a commitment yet. But movement. And movement was what had been missing from everything before. I thought this would feel like relief. Like something had been resolved. It didn't. It felt balanced. Not in a comfortable way. In a clear one. Nothing about the situation had become easy. My parents were still who they were. My brother still had to decide what he would do. The financial pressure on my side hadn't disappeared. But the structure underneath it had changed. And that was the part that mattered. The transfers weren't invisible anymore. They weren't assumed. They weren't something that existed outside of conversation. They were named. And because they were named, they could be adjusted. I don't think my mother will ever fully see it the way I do. Not completely. And that's fine. She doesn't need to. She just needs to understand that what was there before wasn't permanent. And that what exists now is something we agreed on. That's enough. The word abandonment never came up again. Not once. And that told me everything I needed to know. Not that it had been wrong. That it had been reconsidered. That was the real shift. Not in the money. In the meaning. I used to think consistency made something stable. Now I think consistency without definition just makes something invisible. And invisible things are easy to misunderstand when they stop. 7 years of giving. 1 month of stopping. That was all it took to see it clearly. It didn't break the relationship, but it changed how I understood it. And once that understanding was there wasn't any version of me that went back to doing it the same way again. Nothing collapsed. Nothing was repaired overnight. It just became visible. And that turned out to be the most useful thing that could have happened. I don't regret sending the money. I regret never naming what it was while I was doing it. Because once something becomes invisible, people don't see it when it's there. They only feel it when it's gone. If this kind of story sounds familiar, where silence ends is where I talk about the things that don't get said until they have to. And I'm curious, have you ever given something for so long that people forgot it was a choice?